No, just wherever you'd like. Please. All right, so just to get right into it here, I've got a question I'm going to pose to the entire panel, and I'd ask you in your responses to please briefly introduce yourselves. Tell us about your day job and your respective roles within ORAN Alliance, TIP, and or both, if that's the case. So, you know, David and Ian just gave us a detailed look at how this collaborative framework can work. So I guess the question is, at a high level, do you think that this will do what it's intended to do? Are there any gaps in there that are maybe not necessarily applicable to the way operator organizations work? So Andreas, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, so ladies should be first, but okay. So we'll see. I think it's a big achievement, and it may and will help the industry to get a clearer picture and even to minimize the cost for testing and integration. And what is important is just look with an open mind on it. And if we see, okay, something doesn't work, then we start a process to redesign it and look for other approach or a better approach. And by the way, introduction, so I'm Andreas Gladisch, VP Emerging Technologies at Deutsche Telekom Group Technology, working in TIP in the technical committee, and in my second life I'm also organizing the i14Y lab in Berlin, which is a slightly different approach to help the community to minimize the cost for testing and integration.
Excellent. And Renuka, thoughts on this framework and how it will play out in the real world?
Sure. Should I start with the introduction first, or?
Please.
Okay. So Renuka, part of Meta Connectivity. I have been with TIP from its inception almost, and I'm right now focused on Open RAN as the primary project group. I'm also part of the technical committee. And this collaboration, I would say, is long time coming, and I'm very excited that we have arrived at such a good framework here. What is missing? I wouldn't say anything key is missing as it stands today. But of course, the specs evolve. Of course, the products evolve. And so with that, there will be a need to kind of get a continuous evolvement of this particular framework as well. And so that's what we should look forward to, and kind of the two organizations should be working closely together to see where we are seeing opportunities to improve it further as needed.
Excellent. And Atousa, if you can maybe just give us an introduction and give us some reaction to this collaborative framework that was just laid out for us.
Yeah, so Atousa Adefia, I'm in Orange Innovation and head of a department in charge of innovation in radio and environment. I'm actively involved in Open RAN related activities in the ORAN Alliance. I'm part of the ORAN Alliance Executive Committee. I'm part of TIP Technical Committee, and also very active in the MOU collaboration between European operators on Open RAN. So actually, regarding this collaboration, I think it's a great milestone that has been achieved, and we are supportive of it. But actually, as you know, the devil lies always in the details. So I think that now that we have this general principal agreement, we need to work on detailed process to be able to have clear alignment on the release roadmap definition, on the test plan definition, and also on the result sharing, and also give this opportunity to both ORAN Alliance and TIP to actually, based on their experience on the testing, to give feedback, mutual feedback, and it could be in a form of change request, for example, to improve the quality of test specifications or the test plans.
All right, and Ku, if you could maybe give us some introductory commentary.
All right, perfect. So my name is Ku. So I have 3 hats. I work in Keysight as a director, head of standards and as well as solution strategy. My second hat, I'm a co-chair in ORAN Alliance as MVPC, co-chair basically responsible for roadmap, release planning, right, prioritizations. In ORAN Alliance, my third hat, I work in TIP as a test and integration co-chair as well. So from my perspective, I think this collaboration is really good, to be honest with you. I think we've actually been working on this, driving towards both organizations, full steam ahead on Open RAN, really have its own defined charter objective for quite a few years, coming together, putting together a framework. As Atusa has mentioned, I think right now the framework has been defined. Now is where the rubber hits the road. Really got to try to, see as both teams get together, how do we really fit into the life cycle of Open RAN? How do we serve the needs, right, of the ecosystem throughout the entire life cycle, from design, simulation, all the way to deployment operations, and look at how both organizations can really evolve, right, to be able to fill in all the gaps based on the initial framework that's actually taken a lot of time for us to get together to define today. So thank you.
And Abita-san, you made it just in time. So if you could maybe just give us some commentary on this new strength and collaboration and kind of how you see it playing out.
Yep. First of all, sorry for joining late. I'm Sadeki Abeta of NTT Docomo. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me in this important session. And I'm the executive member of that alliance. So on behalf of alliance, I joined this meeting. And what we want, we should avoid the fragmentation. That is more important, I think. And now it's we alliance and the TIP is going in the same direction. That is more important, I think. And alliance is mainly focused on that. Originally focused on that. Specified specifications. Because to support interoperability, we need that common open interface. So common open specifications. And we have already done, and that so TIP and Orange use both use the same specification. That is excellent. And now is that we are going to that commercial. That means that we need more tested, and some part that they are so duplicate or overlapped. Of course, that must be needed, but we try to minimize that cost as much as possible. So there's collaboration we can accelerate, and we can also reduce the total cost for the operators. So we think that collaboration is tolerance and TP is very, very important. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So David and Ian laid out how to do this, so I'm not going to dwell on that, but I am curious about how do you know if you're doing it correctly? How do you measure success as you follow through with this collaborative framework and move, hopefully, at a higher rate out of lab and into field deployment? So hoping to get some perspective on just when do you know if what you're doing is correct? When do you know if what you're doing needs adjustment? So Atusa, maybe the ORAN Alliance view on that?
Yeah, actually, it's not that easy to compare and to define a success criteria because we don't have a clear reference actually. But if I want to give some KPIs, important KPIs that could show whether we are in a good direction or not, I would say that it could be quantified in terms of the cost saving or time saving that we would have by avoiding such the duplicated testing and also by unifying the test plans between ORAN Alliance and TIP. And another important part is how we can actually, the fact that we recognize mutually the certification of badging of each organization would also help to avoid, to actually save some time and avoid some redundant testing. And overall, thanks to all of these, I would say, efforts and coordination, the end result that we would see would be acceleration of the readiness of the products and the end-to-end systems in the field.
And what's the TIP perspective there, Renuka? Are you able to kind of look forward, and if we see more deployments more quickly, we know that what we're doing is the right thing?
Absolutely. And I will totally agree with what Atusa started with. Cost and time to market is what the important parameters will be. And the way to measure them quantitatively could be how many blueprints or integrated solutions are we able to derive out of this process. And so how many badges, for example, are we able to put onto the exchange, which will be significant in showing if we have made this model successful in terms of putting it in place for testing, integration, validating the products, making them ready for deployment. So all of this can be kind of summarized as the KPIs. Again, it's not very easy to just put those two in there, but I think those are the starting indicators of how many integrated solutions or blueprints we are able to push through and get the products on exchange.
And Ku, you mentioned the three hats that you wear, so if you could maybe put them all on at once and think about, what success looks like in this context.
So building on the, again, I fully agree with what Atusa and Renuka has mentioned, and building on to Abeta-san's point, so ORAN Alliance, the core mission of ORAN Alliance is really to be able to develop the best-in-class multi-vendor interoperable Open RAN specifications. And ORAN Alliance have developed a few enablers initiative around this, right? Basically like open source community, and then you have the plugfests, you have the OTICs, you have the certification and badges framework. Is really to be able to look at how do we actually enable verification, assurance to the industry about the conformance to the specs, and enabling through multi-vendor interoperability from functional performance, right, security, and as well as sustainability, right? What we call right now the energy planes of Open RAN. How do we make Open RAN truly multi-interoperable? From TIP perspective, right, it's all about the productization. How do we look at specific prioritized blueprints and take vertical slice across and say, make this work? Get all the vendor aligned to all the product requirements, regardless of the interface. When I want an R radio unit, I want a DU, I want a CU, a RIC, and accept RF, SMO. Just pick the best-in-class solutions, put them together, and get them to really, really work. Again, with performance, not just in terms of like something that we can try to put together, pre-integrated, and go. So the measure of success, in my view, there are two aspects. One is in terms of how do we get this really going from a telco use cases perspective that we know today, right? Obviously, including the AI, ML aspects and other things. And the second area that we try to look at in terms of the measure of success is going to areas that we do not know today, right? The private networks, the dedicated networks, the local 5G in Japan, and really enabling some of these new use cases, which is going to take us right beyond what 5G is able to do today by itself, right? Whether this is open, not open, but this presents a brand new opportunity for the entire ecosystem. So again, the two measures of success, we look at the current markets, telco use cases, the new markets, right, emerging, which is related to Industry 4.0, metaverse, right, whatever we want to call this, and the speed and cost of evolution, together with sustainability, I think those are the core measures in my view. Thank you.
Right, and so a question for the operators on the panel, if you can maybe reflect on your organization's engagements with TIP, with ORAN Alliance, and give us some idea of what you've seen work well and maybe what you've seen work not so well. Abeta-san, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Really, we hesitate to say that we are not a TIP vendor yet, but our group company, the entity data, is member of that TIP. And so in that sense, we didn't directly work with TIP in our lab yet. But yesterday we announced that we will collaborate with Vodafone. It's like that, of course, that collaboration in the ORAN and the TIP testbed, that is more efficient. But also that working into collaboration with among the operators, that is also that useful. And so I think that so we have the ORAN Alliance have the plugfest. I think that could know much more than me. And also that TIP has the test lab and some area we have the jointly tested. That is, I think that we efficiently do that test. And so for our case, that we did some tests by ourselves. But if we shared that result to not only that ORAN Alliance, but also the TIP, that also helped to accelerate that open networks. Since that we introduced that Open RAN, much vendor Open RAN from the 2020, so more than two years experience we have, and really mix and match network we achieve in our commercial networks. So then we know that what is difficult or what is easy, or of course that we have already solved it, but that kind of the experience we can share, not only the oral and tip. So I think that that's also helped to that acceleration of that collaboration.
Just the same kind of question. How have you, over the years, taken learnings derived from ORAN, from TIP, and brought them into Orange?
So actually, working with both organizations is very helpful for us to drive this our journey towards deployment of the Open RAN. So, but what we see, I mean, ORAN focuses mainly on the product specification, and the TIP mainly on the end-to-end type of testing. And what we see that could be very useful in the future is to have a kind of unified test plans where we can mutualize efforts, and also the fact that we would be able to share largely the results, and also benefit from the results of tests that are being done in other ORAN or TIP labs. That's the main point that could help us to avoid any redundant type of testing and effort.
And Andreas, what's that process look like for DT?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are a member of TIP and ORAN as well, and I think both organizations share the vision of disaggregated RAN and have approaches to make that happen. And I think my learning is, especially from the discussion we had now between the different organizations, so there's the openness to identify the topics and to figure out how we can simplify or how we can solve the problem, or if there's a challenge. So experience so far, we ran last year this joint ORAN TIP plug fest in Berlin, by the way, together with Orange in Paris and colleagues in Madrid. So that was, I think, a first step. So just a pragmatic attempt to approach the industry jointly, the two organizations. And that is what it is about, to identify the right roles, and if there's an uncertainty, to handle it openly.
Well, so to follow up with all three of you on this, we've discussed throughout this desire to avoid duplication of test and verification, which obviously that would certainly be a much more efficient process. But I am curious how that corresponds to how your organizations run. At what point can you trust and rely on a process that you did not fully control? So just, is there a point in time where you're able to take something that is external, bring it internal, and not do that duplicate step? Andreas, I mean, what's the potential for making a more efficient process?
Yeah, so in general, the goal should be to minimize the effort for testing, because we want to bring a lot of smaller companies on board. So that's why we really need a very efficient approach. So sharing of test results, sharing of test plans, agreeing on test plans, that is definitely the right first step. And I think, and that brings us back to the KPIs, it is also important to understand what is the meaning for the industry if someone gets this or that batch. And I think that could be an interesting next step, that the industry jointly works, or mainly the operators jointly work on a question how to make the relevance of that batches or whatever it is even bigger for the industry. So that that there's more interest at the vendor side to go for that batches, and that there's a simplification for both sides, the vendors and the operators, to bring the solutions into real life.
And Atus, same question, really. I mean, David made the good point that there's no future where TIP is going to do all of your testing for you, but they're going to take on parts of it. So just how do you bring that into Orange without doing it again?
Yeah, actually, the idea is not to duplicate all of the tests. So if there is a good collaboration between TIP and ORAN Alliance on the definition of test plans based and test specification, and also definition of blueprints based on operators' real requirements and what will be deployed in field, I think that it will cover somehow around 90% of the tests that needs to be done and validated. And then, of course, there will still, there will still be some additional tests that needs to be done in operators lab because there are some specific parameters and tuning that we need to do ourselves. It's very specific to each operator, but this represents only a small portion of the test, and we can handle it if the 90% of the rest is provided and validated by the ecosystem and with implication of TIP and ORAN Alliance.
Abeda-san, what would that mean for NTT Docomo if 90% of it was done by TIP and ORAN Alliance? Does that hasten things up, or is it just another affirmation step before you do it again?
Yeah, we think we can save that some test cost. For example, that in terminal case, there first is the GCF, and of course still need a test because that frequency band is different from the countries, and those things we need to do. But basic part, for example, they did already, or chip test already did some tested, and that is that then we can use that some result. So after that, so we have, especially the COM part, we did that. The TIP and ORAN Alliance did the test. We can also reuse that part. We don't need to do that all the test. Of course, some sampling test maybe, but I think that no need to do the 100% test. So, and we can focus on that specific area, which especially for the operators focusing on.
Right, and I'd maybe take a brief pause if there's any questions from the audience that you'd like to pose to our panelists. Yeah, Paul, if you could just, your name, company, and give us your question.
Paul Rose from WWT. I saw the slide earlier on where we talked about removing the sub from suboptimal. We talked about doing, thank you. So we talked about removing 90% of the testing and centralizing it. Now the slide actually suggested that classic vendor RAN achieved that today. I'm not sure that's really the case. So would it actually be the case that if we're achieving our aims, we're actually significantly ahead of the last 30 years of RAN delivery by creating a common set of test requirements, delivering them centrally, and then as operators, you're then able to take that with trust and be further towards commercially deploying that than you would be with a traditional RAN system?
Anyone want to take that? I think that was an operator question.
Seems so. Yeah, good question. So first point is the assumption that we had very similar requirements in the past. Is that really right? So my impression is in the past we had very okay, there was ETSI, etc., for some building basic stuff. But if you look at the equipment, then we had also very different requirements, which is, I think, more harmonized today thanks to a lot of standardization bodies and other industry organizations. So first answer. So then B, the industries are working differently. So if you look at the cable industry, how they approach it with cable labs, so there seems to be an indication that things can be approached differently if we compare this industry with the telco industry coming from the fixed line access and the mobile access. As a first guess, as an answer.
Anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on that?
Not an operator view, but yeah, you can.
Actually,
I can add the tip side of view for sure on where we see efficiencies.
Yeah, actually, I'm quite aligned. I think that most of the tests and requirements, I mean, there are lots of common requirements and configurations between operators, even if we have different spectrum or different, we want to activate some different features. There are lots of them that are in common, and that's why we think that most of this, I mean, a unified test plan and a kind of centralization and a collaboration between industry to provide a validated, pre-integrated and validated system could be useful for all operators. And then for the rest, of course, that there will also, I mean, we will have always some extra testing to do because in any case that there will be some differences between deployments of operators' deployment in different countries. but it won't represent it won't be the major part of the testing.
Yeah, Ala.
What you said previously about, the future vision, well, actually, both certification and badging framework could be consolidated. So that was really, when I saw the plan, which was previously presented by Oren and Tip, actually, that's the big question, right? Because, the process is clear. The process is clear what should be tested in Oren, what should be tested in Tip. Still, to me, as a vendor, it feels like there can be a big attempt to consolidate it into a single process, like firstly, perhaps, conformance testing by Oren requirements, but then taking it as an input really into tip badging or whichever, that would eventually be called, and actually apply an additional test, and then eventually issuing that, badging covering both, but, at a single place, perhaps, for us as vendors, that would significantly ease the process. And also, it would be, for service providers, I guess, also easier to understand what we've been compliant to, as a vendors, right? By the way, I'm talking both about single vendor plan and end-to-end plan of interoperability between several vendors. So really, my question is about, are there any concrete steps towards that? Have you been discussed that? Okay, this is the plan now, but the roadmap going forward in a half a year, in a year, we should be producing that, consolidated framework or whichever. That's what my question is.
Yeah, actually, we are at the early stage. I think that the first step would be to, for both organization or Alliance and TIP to mutually recognize this badging, the certification of each other. This is the first step that will be put in place. And of course, there will be some room for improvement. What you say about consolidating and having a single set of badges and certification could help, but maybe we have some other ideas in the future. We need to think about it. But what will be really useful and helpful for operators, of course, is to have certification and badges that is, recognized enough and widely in the ecosystem that we can use easily when we are discussing with vendors for in our sourcing process or in discussion with regarding the products and end-to-end configuration.
Anyone have anything to add there?
Yeah. But please.
Yeah,
please
thank
go
you.
first.
Yeah. So we, introduced the merge vendor network already, and from our experience, we also discussed with vendors which testing is responsible for the vendors, and which is responsible for the operator, our entity Docomo. And this is that case for only for us. So I think that we also need to consider the which should be the responsible for the alliance or TIP or operators or vendors. So that kind of discussion we may need it. And maybe that at the beginning that I don't think the 90% we can save the test. But some parts at the beginning may be overlapped, but we can also reduce that overlap when doing the test. And also that we rely on the performance of that other partners. So it takes a little bit time. Not so from today or tomorrow we can change the scheme. I think that it does work well, since that from our experience we split that responsibility for that vendor side and operator side. And it does work well in our network.
And I think maybe if I'm allowed to add from a test and measurements perspective, I'll definitely agree in terms of the rationalization of the testing efforts, right, from all perspectives. The one thing that we are basically seeing is building on to Abeta-san's point. So today we basically have a spectrum of test cases, which are basically being covering from conformance, interoperability, end-to-end functional performance, security, right, energy efficiency KPIs, among other things, robustness, sustainability, and all. Now, I think as an industry, we will probably need to be able to look at what are the areas that ORAN will need to cover, TIP will need to cover, versus the spaces that will not be covered. What we call the deployment readiness test. I mean, a lot of operators are coming to us today and say, if I get an ORAN badge, I get a TIP badge, would the operators feel that I can deploy it, right? And you go to the operators say, let me think about this, right? Well, it's actually because there still exists a gap between where we are at today and when can you really get the trust and accountability from the operators, because it's about accountability. If I get a badge, right, can that particular entity that issued the badge be accountable for the operators if something doesn't work, right? It goes back to that as well. And from the second perspective, I think with the number of test cases that we have, to be honest with you, we really need to be able to move on to a standardized CI/CD/CT framework, because it's not about initial testing. It's about what if you make a configuration change, you make a software update, you make a bug fix. How do we make sure that any changes in any one of the components in the multi-vendor system get really tested in a really, really quick way and very precise? So those are my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Can
so
I add another?
No,
Go
please,
ahead.
please. No.
Real quick, shout out to NEC for completing the badge process today. So that's one proof point already of how the process will be working. And then to your point, the end goal is to support the deployment. So the badging process has to go in steps of, do we take the specs and do the conformance against them first, and then go for the next step of IoT, and then end-to-end. After that will be maybe the TIP's role of, do we do a system level, feature level. So we are moving the process forward to fasten the end goal of deployment-related readiness. And that's how which organization does which part might not be as important, as long as the 2 organizations are coordinating and taking the input from one and feeding into the other, which will remove the fragmentation and also put a structure on how the test plans are derived for each of the steps. So that's the execution, of course, we have to get to, but that could be the objective.
Yeah, exactly. And first steps are already done. So there is agreed test plans agreed between different operators concerning specific use cases, so that are available. That for sure it needs improvement. We are, all of us are learning in that domain. And so next step could be what we try with the i14Y, that we go for a reference implementation or a reference scenario agreed between a couple of operators, and we install that in the lab, so that hopefully minimizes the effort for the testing even more. So because then you can easily oversimplifying, easily remove some modules and put in other modules and run your test.
Yeah, Ku, your comment about CI/CD and then continuous testing as an answer to just the complexity and volume of test cases that are needed is quite interesting. It reminds me of Yago's comment in his keynote yesterday around, is 5G the last generation of the incumbent architecture? And there's not really a yes/no answer to that, but if you look ahead 5-10 years, we have to think about cloud native, AI native, increasingly distributed networks. So it's not going to get more simple, certainly, yet when we look at this collaboration framework, it's focused on making things simple, making things streamlined. So maybe we could go down the panel here and think long-term about how ORAN and TIP evolve their relationship, evolve these collaborative frameworks to kind of address this rampant complexity that we all know is coming. Abeda-san, maybe we start with you.
Yes. What our alliance with TIP can do, or also that the vendor community or operators community can communicate or should communicate, because that when we start a discussion CI/CD or lifecycle management, and now is the vendors cycle is different. That it's so many times we need to that integration and the test. So, if that, so we'll discuss and decided that life cycle, for example, of course that so each vendor upgrade by their own timing, but if there also the major update we aligned, then that we significantly reduce that test cost or integration cost, like a single vendors, because operators just only say that final update. So then, that's I think that first we both ORNS and the TP and also the operator committee and the vendor committee should align or try to align. So that is, I think, the benefit for that both operator and the vendors, because that if that the update cycle is different from the operators, vendor need to care that every time, and vice versa, at the vendor timing different, operator need to care over the time. So then I think that we decided what kind of cycle or what kind of test we will. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think, again, I'm very excited about the announcements that we made today, or more details has been shared with the TIP and ORAN Alliance collaboration. I'm part of the team working on that details. And obviously, we've discussed other things around. So today we talked about test plans alignments, test specs alignments, and as well as the recognition for awards, right, the badging certificates. I think moving forward, when we start to look at tackling to Sean's point in terms of the new use cases and requirements coming from the industry beyond 5G and 6G, we've actually been speaking about how we can try to align upstream, right, the requirements and use cases really coming from the industry. So this is one area that we're planning to work on. Again, both teams together with the operators and the vendors. I mean, ORAN Alliance, TIP, both organizations are extremely open, right, for inputs and contributions. And moving upstream to get to the use cases and requirements alignment, looking at, for example, what TIP blueprints are focusing on. For example, if there's going to be a blueprint focusing on smart manufacturing, then I think the corresponding feedback, right, and I think ORAN Alliance should be working on specifications to make sure that those blueprints can be supported upfront. So that will shorten the life cycle in terms of TIP basically saying that these are the things we need, and then ORAN Alliance will take extra cycle of a few months or years to come up with. So as we go towards beyond 5G and 6G together, I think there's room, obviously, for improved collaboration. We have a very good starting point, and I think moving up, right, the requirements would really help, especially ORAN Alliance has recently kicked off a NGRG, Next Generation Research Group, that really take a fresh look at the 6G landscape, and I think this is one area that we can look at together.
Just a long-term view.
Yeah, I think that if you want to be able to handle the complexity that will come, in the future, there are three main aspects that I would mention. One is we need to focus on what really matters for field deployment for operators. We need a good alignment between both organizations on all of the definition of blueprints, definition of release roadmaps, and testing. And the third part is if we want to cope with all of these product upgrades, etc., we need to put in place, of course, a kind of automated testing. And these three aspects are very important to be able to manage the complexity.
Renuka, thoughts there on sort of how this collaboration continues to evolve over the coming years?
I'll keep it short. So 2 words come to my mind: the coordination and consistency. So collaboration is set now. The next 2 steps will be to continue to coordinate it and make it consistent. So there is a call to action inherently for the vendor partners as well as for the operators. Bring in your input, make sure that you help us derive those test plans which are very relevant, and bring in your input also on the execution process of it, on how fast are we able to churn out the test plans, how effective the testing is, and that is what will make it successful actually for 5G and 6G and whatnot. It's important that we make an effort right now to take this important milestone where we set this today and take it forward with coordinating closely and making it a consistent model.
All right. And Andreas, if you'll just predict the future for us, please.
Which is always difficult now, I think the direction is set, and we made a big step forward, and I would expect that that both organizations will continue to find their role because there is the interest to make the disaggregated RAN happen. I would expect for the future that new organizations will appear, and we need to go through that exercise again. Name it Linux Foundation, we have, so that is obvious, but also industry organizations, because if we want to create a bigger market, a larger market for the Open RAN components, then it might be relevant to work with guys who just build networks for enterprise automation or for shop floor, etc. And these are very different players, so and that could be a quite interesting challenge to work with them.
Abdel, I see this red screen, but can stretch a little bit if there's any additional questions from the audience here. Yeah, anybody have anything for the panel? Seeing none? Oh, yes. Could get a microphone to this gentleman in the back, please.
Hi, this is Florian Holländer from Next Statista. And towards the end, maybe a slight deviation from the purely technical discussion. So we're talking about smaller ecosystem participants who are overburdened already with answering individual demands. And I see the technical cost savings advantages of testing integration together. So reducing the demand, reducing the strain. And towards the panel, do you think that this, on the technical side, already is enough to really enable smaller ecosystem players to come towards being then put into production, so surviving the books of RFIs and RFQs being thrown at them? And maybe is even the badges a way to also bridge towards the commercial side of easing the process for those smaller players? Or are other things, from your experience in talking to them, are other things necessary to not have them die on the way towards being put into production?
Who'd like to take that one?
We need another hour.
Who'd like to take that one in approximately 40 seconds?
So the challenge is how to, so that you want to change the situation in the market. So that is what we try to do with the test plans and all this stuff and sharing of resources is change the situation concerning, the economists would say, transaction costs, so that it is cheaper to run such transactions between entities. But that not means automatically that the market will grow. So the question is, can we find additional industries, additional segments that the market will grow? And that gives more opportunity to new players. That's what I would expect.
Anybody else have any thoughts there?
Well, maybe I can try to take a step at this. And I would say, at least based on my experiences, the credibility, provided when you get the ORAN certificate badge and as well as a TIP badge do help, especially with some of the enterprises that I've actually dealt with, right? So right now, there's actually a big, I've actually been in the industry for 20 years, right? Maybe nothing compared to many of you here. But when I used to be speaking to universities, academias, enterprises, to be able to deploy for 4G or 5G connectivity is always a really big thing to them. And now I've actually seen a few cases whereby enterprises are actually more open, right, to Open RAN and say, I can try to get Open RAN, I can try to set up a classroom, I can try to set up a lab very easily, and they ask for some basic credibility check, right? And I've actually met a few vendors whereby they say we participated in this TIP badging, ORAN certificates and stuff like that. The process is going to be completed within a few months. This really gives assurance to the enterprises, areas, right, or the operators whereby, okay, there's some tests which has been done, and it's a collaboration of like 2 world-class organizations, international standards, not small bodies, and these are labs, which basically speaks credibility. So I think it does qualify smaller players as we start to look at having the OTEX and the TIP community lab to really try to incubate these smaller players and bring them to the global stage. And we are seeing this happening, so hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Any other questions that we could reasonably answer in a very short amount of time? Yes, sir?
So my name is Volker Ricker from Comscope. I have a question. How do you work together with other organizations, for example, NGMN? We talked a lot about ORAN and TIP, but I'm missing this piece.
Whomever
I
would like
can-
to
Yeah,
say.
try to answer. Yeah, actually, so that it depends on the what's the topic we are working for. For example, NGMN, they define that some use case or the requirement, and that's actually so we can have the relationship between that Oran Alliance and NGMN, so we can reflect that requirement or of that NGMN in the discussion of that Oran Alliance, for example.
From a TIP point of view, all the standards organizations are welcome because TIP is not producing or defining standards. So we are leveraging all that input about standards, specifications, use cases, and then we focus on productizing. So that's more of an input, more the merrier sort of. So definitely welcome that synergy with NGMN too.
And if I'm allowed to add maybe just a few key points. So in terms of, like, for example, as I mentioned earlier on, ORAN Alliance has started the NextG research group. And right now within the research stream 1, especially in terms of use cases and standards analysis, gap analysis, we are basically taking NGMN work into considerations. And there are various occasions whereby NGMN has really good publications that talk about, for example, sustainability. NGMN has very good white papers on those. Some of the initial trials, 5G KPIs, analysis and stuff like that, those are basically brought into the process of ORAN Alliance. So in ORAN Alliance, again, we are not about reinventing the wheel. The organization is really open to really look at leveraging the latest and greatest and collaborating as an entire industry just to be part of the industry. Those are my 2 cents.
All right, excellent. Well, I think we're going to end it there, but thank you all for coming to this session. Thank you for your attention and the questions. And let's have a round of applause for our panelists, please.